My name is Don Snyder. I'm the product manager here at Chargent, and I'm glad that you chose to be here for this training, and I hope to make it worth your while. And my first goal for this training is to equip you with all-around Chargent user know-how. If your company has recently installed Chargent, or if you've updated recently, my hope is that you are like the go-to person for teaching the rest of your team when people need to figure out how to do this or that. So that's my goal. My second goal is that you leave this summit with 2 certifications, because I think that'll look really cool on your office wall, and you'll be overachievers, which everybody likes that. So this slide deck is going to be text heavy because this is going to provide step-by-step instructions, and it's actually a document that I'm going to provide to you after the fact, so you can use it as a reference resource, hopefully. But again, this stuff is going to be easy after all the admin training that you just did. So our agenda for today is as follows. We're going to kind of look at the big picture, things to know about Chargent before we delve in. Things like our entity relationship diagram, security, gateways, which you are very intimate with already, Chargent Anywhere. Chargent Anywhere is like the major interface that you'll be using. Then we're going to talk about the basics: one-time payments, recurring payments, refunds versus voids, not a combination of the words refund and void like I just said. We're going to delve into the not-so-basics, things like authorizations, which we've touched on again, partial refunds, payment requests, and then we're going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting and some best practices. And then there is a delightful quiz that you will all get 100% on. So first, this is our basic ERD, or entity relationship diagram. Now this is not at all the total ERD, but we have objects for payment requests and gateways, but for the sake of becoming a power user, these are the 2 major objects that you'll be interacting with. So first, the Chargent order. It is like the meat and potatoes. This object is less of an order and more of a payment profile. This is the object where payment details live, as well as billing, shipping address, recurring payment details, level 2 and level 3 data. And the other objects are the Chargent transactions. And these are the child objects of Chargent order. And every action that you take in Chargent results in a Chargent transaction, regardless of the type, charge, void, refund, what have you. Even failed actions that you take in Chargent will result in a Chargent transaction. So your failures will be documented, which is something that hopefully none of your parents told you. But it's actually relevant in this case because you want to know when that stuff happened and how to address it and how to troubleshoot it. The Chargent transaction houses the charge type, like charge versus void or refund. It also gives you your response, right? So was this approved or declined, or was there some other type of error? And that response is directly from the gateway. It essentially indicates whether your transaction was a success. The transaction also shows the date and time of that action. So you might have a Chargent with a bunch of transactions, and looking at the Chargent order and looking at a date and time there isn't really as useful as actually looking at the transaction if you want to see when a transaction occurred. So again, there are more objects in our app, but these are the 2 that you, as a user, from the perspective of a power user, are going to interact with the most. So let's talk about security first. As a Chargent user, you and your team might be asked by a customer to assure them that the transaction is secure. So here are some key points to keep in mind regarding Chargent and the security of your company and the security of your customers. First, Chargent is as secure as your Salesforce org. This is because Chargent code is 100% Salesforce native, so transactions are processed directly from your org to your payment gateway. There's no middleman, so that's a pretty big point in our security. Second, we tokenize payment data, and Desmond talked to you a little bit about this, right? What that means is that you don't have to store card or bank numbers in your org at all. And while this is technically an option, it is also an industry standard, and we highly encourage that you tokenize your payment details. Most of you are customers of ours, so I'm going to say that thing again. If you're not tokenizing your payment details, you should. You super should. Another key point about security is our payment console, which you've played with already. It allows you to process a payment entirely in memory. So card and bank details aren't stored in your org, even momentarily. That payment console pops up, you enter that data in there, it's transmitted immediately, and nothing is saved in your org. So that's another kind of key point of our security. And for an added level of security, your customers can enter their payment details by themselves using payment requests, which is another thing that you've seen but not played with because that's not configured in your orgs. But this means that your customer's payment data is never revealed to anybody at your company during or after the payment is made. This might be a policy thing that works for your guys' use case. Maybe it's not a policy, but you have some customers that are like, no, I don't want to tell you my card number. So that's kind of where the security implication of this comes from, right? So gateways. The gateway is really what our app communicates with. Again, you've set one up so far, you've played with it. Our app sends payments, basically payment-related requests and details to your company's payment gateway. And as a Chargent user, you won't be interacting with it much. I know that you just configured one. You went real deep. But again, this is the context of a power user. So as a power user, you wouldn't be interacting with it much, but it is important that you know how your gateway has been configured because it dictates certain functions and features. For instance, whether the card verification code is required, whether authorizations or refunds or other types of transactions other than just a charge are allowed, whether address verification is required, which types of cards are accepted, which payment types are accepted, and whether tokenization is enabled. What's that thing I just said about tokenization, you guys? I don't remember. Something about, yeah, right? Cool. You're going to answer that question correctly in the quiz. So next is Chargent Anywhere. Again, you've just gotten done playing with this really intimately, but so from the perspective of a power user, it's a lightning component that facilitates the most popular Chargent features on any object in your org. So instead of having to navigate back and forth between objects, Chargent Anywhere allows you to process payments from the objects that you and your team are already working in. Sometimes I say you and your team are living in. It really depends on how many hours you're spending in certain objects, but so I'm talking about this in the big picture section of this training because it's the quickest and most efficient way of using Chargent. And again, the big picture view here is that you can do one-time or recurring payments. You can use this to send payment requests to your customers. This can be used to process card or bank account. And I think Desmond mentioned it, you can also process cash and check payments, which is pretty slick. If you find yourselves at an event or something and you're receiving those payments, you can record those using that Chargent Anywhere component, and it's listed as an order and a transaction just like the rest of your payments. So your accountants, they like it when everything's in one place. This facilitates that, right? The app doesn't literally take cash and checks. You can't push cash into Chargent Anywhere physically. I tried it though. So we're going to be getting into the details, the usage details really of Chargent Anywhere. And if you find that your company, you guys are using Chargent and you're hopping back and forth between some object and Chargent objects like over and over again, it might be a good indicator that if you're not the admin, if you're just a power user, that maybe you should tell the admin, hey, we're always doing everything from this one object. Can we just put Chargent Anywhere on that object? That's kind of the relevancy from a power user perspective, right? Okay, so the basics, one-time payments. One-time payments are just that. It's a payment that you collect just once. And this can be done a number of ways in Chargent, but we're going to focus on Chargent Anywhere. And these slides are going to lay out the basic steps. Again, this is a document that I'm going to provide to you after the fact. That's why there's not a lot of attractive images, and it's mostly about, hey, this is how you do this. So that's the point of this. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you. So a one-time payment. We're going to do this from opportunities because that's where I've configured Chargent Anywhere for this demo. So I'm just going to pop into an opportunity that I already have set up here. And for one-time payment, I'm going to click the payment console. Now, a quick note, if you pop into the payment console on any object that you've configured and you see that credit card data, the asterisks, whatever the plural is, that means that there is a recurring payment that's already set up on this or against this opportunity, related to this opportunity. So I'm actually going to stop that by clicking on the recurring tab and clicking stop recurring. So that actually wasn't part of my original training, but you did just learn how to stop a recurring payment in Chargent Anywhere. So that's more bang for the buck. So, okay, one-time payment. We click on the payment console. By the way, you guys can do this with me if you have those orgs still set up. But again, this is going to be super familiar stuff. These fields, I have it configured so that it's pulling in the contact and it's pulling in the amount already. We can change that if we want. And you've seen this part before. There's that field validation. So the point of that field mapping is not to necessarily to do all the work for you all the time. It's to do as much of the work that it can for you, and if you need to make an adjustment to that, absolutely, you can edit those. Yeah, it's. I could see a use case in a future version of this to lock that down. Maybe your staff, you want them to be completely dictated by whatever the object is that they're configured on. But currently, v1.26, not an option yet. So it'll fill it in for you. If you need to edit it, you can. So I'm going to just do the one-time payment. Click the charge button, hopefully get a success message. There it is. So you guys have seen that before. So the steps there for that are going to be on this slide for the next time that you want to play with that, right? So we've submitted a one-time payment and we received that success message letting us know that the payment went through. So what's the result, right? What records were created? Well, as we discussed before, a Chargent order was created and a Chargent transaction was created. And that's because we did a one-time payment. We cleared out that recurring payment. So this was a new thing. So new order, new transaction. And we can take a look at those records. I have a related list here, so I can just pop into that. So the order that was created looks like this. Desmond went over a lot of these fields for you, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining everything that's in there that you've already been explained. But the key things are, this was the gateway that was used. This is the opportunity that this order is related to, and that's because we had Chargent Anywhere configured on an opportunity. So for convenience, anytime you're looking at an order that came from a Chargent Anywhere configuration and an object, it links it back to you if you need to. And this is the transaction. And the transaction is where you get that really finite detail, right? The exact date and time, the gateway date, in fact, we call it, just to make it clear to you that this is when your gateway said yes, right? The response message, approved, or response status approved, response message, this transaction has been approved. Response message tends to be more useful when it wasn't approved. That's where it gives you a little bit of like, hey, this is probably what happened, right? And then credit card information. Again, no card number stored, just a token. Something that's kind of convenient about having this info on both the transaction and the Chargent order, because it is on both sides, right? Something convenient about that is you can have a Chargent order and have as many transactions ran against that order as you want. Somebody in your company could have popped into the order and changed things. Maybe they were running new transactions against that same order and they changed the payment type or maybe some type of update. Transactions, they won't change. That's always going to show the data that was, or the payment information that was actually used. So this was that Visa with this token, right? That's why it ends in 4 ones. That's why the transaction data kind of mimics some of that data that's also on the order, because some of our customers are setting up a one-time payment on an order, and then every one-time payment they do, they just go back to that same order and they edit some fields and do it. We don't recommend doing it that way, but a lot of our customers do it that way, especially with Chargent Anywhere now. You don't have to do it that way. But that's why that data is on both objects. That makes sense? Okay, so back to the basics, right? Recurring payments. Again, you've done this, you've configured it, but we're going to go through it again because this is a power user training and you super want that certification. So a recurring payment, I'm going to pop right back into that same opportunity. And the process is largely the same, right? We are going to click the payment console button in Chargent Anywhere. And this time we're going to click the recurring tab. And you've seen it before, but I'm going to point it out. When you click recurring, it brings up the second field, the recurring amount field. Also, I'm not sure if Desmond's had this configured, but I have my gateway set up to allow multiple currencies. That's why you see a currency pick list here. So back to our recurring payment. Charge $100 for the first one, and charge $16. So it's a bargain. And then same process as before, right? Credit card info. A cool feature that we built into Chargent Anywhere is if you have entered payment data in and then you decide to click the payment type from card to bank account or vice versa, you actually get a message that says, hey, for security purposes, we're going to clear those details entered because while they're not saved anywhere, they are in memory right now. And if you're going to proceed with this component in general, we're going to make sure to scrap that data for the security of your customers. So if you do switch You get a warning message, which is good in case you accidentally clicked it, but it's also good because it kind of reinstates the fact that we're super secure. So you hit next, and this is where you choose your recurring definition. This is where you choose the frequency. You have lots of options all the way from, daily, weekly, bi-weekly, all the way to once every 2 years. That's what that means, right? I'm going to do monthly. I said monthly. Payment start date. Now, in this instance, if this was like a cable contract and you charge them like for the first month today, and then you're setting up a recurring payment, you probably want to go a month out. So kind of a best practice. Make sure that you understand what your company should be charging at which intervals. But typically it's going to be a month out. So today is the 19th. What was today? The 20th? So I'm going to do a month out. I'm going to say the payment start date is the 20th. Now, the payment start it's not talking about today's charge. That's a separate charge, so that's what this is for. Unending is the stop rule, but you have other options. For instance, if you click count, it's going to open up this field down here where you tell it you're going to charge that much per month this many times. So maybe it's an installment thing, and they're paying 5 payments of $16. You type 5 in here. And then if you choose date, it opens up the payment end date field, which is kind of the same concept, but instead of a count, it's a date, right? You're going to pay me $16 a month until January 4th, 2060. I'm going to choose unending, though, because as Brett Holling would say, it is everyone's favorite stop rule, I believe, right? And then you hit next. And this is a quick summary. This is where you kind of confirm, look, they have a monthly payment of $16. It's going to charge on the 20th of each month, and it gives you kind of a summary of what the next 6 months looks like. And stop criteria is shown here. Frequency is shown here. Contact data is shown here. If you need to do one quick, edit of that, maybe you need to update something. And then the button is very, very descriptive, as you can see. Charge one-time amount of that, and then start recurring billing. So if there's ever any confusion as to what you are doing, it kind of makes it clear. And when you click that button, you have just created a Chargent order and a Chargent transaction, and that's because we created this recurring order, but we also charged something today, right? So if I pop into that Chargent order and look at transactions, you can see that first charge. This first charge does not say recurring because this is not the recurring charge. This was the initial charge. The rest of the transactions that start to happen against this order are actually going to have that little checkbox that says recurring checked. That indicates these are the recurring charges. So if you're ever looking at like a list view of transactions and you want to kind of glean what type of transaction you're looking at, that recurring checkbox is part of that process. This is the remaining steps because there's more than one slide of steps there, the frequency stuff. Okay, so voids and refunds, they have a similar effect, but they are not the same thing. A void cancels a transaction prior to it actually settling at the payment gateway. And in Salesforce, it simply changes, in Chargent specifically, when you do a void, it changes that transaction type that you already submitted as a charge, it changes it to a void. Voids are typically allowed for up to 24 hours after a transaction has been submitted. And I've seen people try to use these interchangeably, so that's why this slide exists, right? A refund is different. A refund refunds the funds from that transaction that's already settled at the payment gateway. And that's typically allowed within 60 to 120 days, but it depends on your payment gateway. And refunds, they don't just change the charge that already happened, it actually creates a new transaction record with a type of refund and has a negative amount. For accounting purposes, that's always the way you want to do that. Whereas a void, for accounting purposes, you could just change the transaction to a void. Because you're pretending as if the charge never happened, right? So you typically use a void when you've submitted a payment, but you quickly realize an error. Like you've fingered something, or maybe somebody relayed the info to you, or the amount was wrong. You would do the void right away. It hasn't been 24 hours. Voiding that will tell the payment gateway, hey, don't settle this payment. It tells Chargent, hey, mark this as voided. And a voided transaction actually returns the funds to your customers quicker, so that should be a concern, right? It typically returns the funds within 24 hours, whereas a refund takes 3 to 5 business days. I've seen it take longer. I've also seen it take way longer, much, much longer than 3 to 5, based on really strange banking and bank account practices. So let's take a look at voids and refunds in action. I am going to pop into, I need to grab as I mentioned, that for a void, you can do something that you've just submitted. So I'm going to pop into our most recent order. And you always want to do voids and refunds from the transaction record. So I'm clicking into the transaction. And we can see that this was that successful charge we did a handful of minutes ago. And I'm going to click the void button here. And there's the approved message. It has been approved. And as I described before, it's going to change that type from charge to void. So if we pop back into the order, we still only have one transaction, and it's been changed from charge to void. So if we're going to do a refund, that looks a little different. I'm going to take a look at an older transaction, or an older order rather. So I think I'll do that. I'm going to pop into Chargent and just go do a list view and take a look at some old orders. So this was processed on the 14th, so it's definitely settled. I'm going to click into the transaction, and I'm going to click refund. So that's going to be a 3 to 5 day wait for the customer to get their funds. The void's going to be about 24 hours, and the refund is going to generate a new charge, or a new transaction rather. It should at least. There we go. So now we have our original charge and the refund. So just to reiterate, voids and refunds are not the same thing. A void is sort of like you just made a mistake. You want to get rid of that payment before it settles, or that charge before it settles. A refund is typically after 24 hours, something happened and they do need a refund. Voids do not create new transactions, but they do alter an existing one. Refunds create a new transaction. That makes sense to everybody? Yeah. Pop back into opportunities. Okay, so the not so basics, authorizations. I think Desmond touched on authorizations a little bit with you guys, right? And I'm sure you've experienced authorizations firsthand. It's an approval from a bank or a card issuer that the customer has sufficient funds to cover the cost of a transaction. So a typical use case for this is a customer buys an item or a service from a company, and the company authorizes for that amount for that item or the service, but they haven't delivered or provided it yet, so they're not going to charge or what's called capture that authorization. In this scenario, a company would authorize for the amount, not capture it until the item is delivered. And authorizations can be done through Chargent Anywhere just like the other transactions. I'm going to show you how that looks. So let's pop into a different opportunity. I'm going to hit the payment console real quick, and I see that we do have a recurring payment set up, so I'm just going to stop that for the sake of this demo. So I am in customer service. I'm charging Mike Spenny. Well, I'm authorizing an amount for Mike Spenny because he just bought something that's going to cost $100, but we haven't shipped it yet. So instead of hitting charge, I'm just going to click authorize at this point. I hope that I set up this gateway to allow authorizations. Looks like I did. I wasn't worried. So now we've just authorized that amount. If we were to take a look at that order and that transaction, we're going to see a type of authorization. Let's say you just authorized for that amount. A day has passed and your fulfillment team has shipped the product. Fulfillment team is going to log into the same object. Opportunity might not be appropriate for this use case, but they're going to log into the same object that Chargent Anywhere transaction was done from. When they click payment console, even if they're not intentionally coming in here to do this, it is going to warn them, hey, you authorized an amount for this customer. Do you want to void that or capture it? So it's cool because it's a very intentional use case, but it's also cool because it's kind of a reminder if somebody forgot and they're popping back into that customer's account to make another charge. So in this case, I'm going to say, yeah, let's capture that. We shipped it. And if we take a look back at that Chargent order, that transaction type has just changed from authorization to type. Make sense? Yeah. So another not so basic, partial refunds. A partial refund means just what the name suggests. It's a refund, but not for the full amount originally charged. And a common scenario here would be, a customer requests on-site service, right? Maybe they're coming in, they need you to come in and fix something. Our company charges the customer based on what that service will most likely cost. And then the on-site technician gets there and discovers that the issue is actually minor. It's not going to cost what we thought it was going to cost. It's going to be less than that. So the company in this instance would issue a partial refund. And partial refunds must be done from the transaction record itself, just like voids and regular refunds. And it looks just like a regular refund, but instead of clicking the refund button, you would click, oops, I gotta go to the transaction. I should follow my own training. We click partial refund instead, and it reminds you of what that current transaction, the original transaction amount was, because you are doing a partial refund, so you're not gonna do that full amount. So can anyone guess what the maximum amount of a partial refund I can make against this one is? $100. She's right. Ideally, it'd be $99 or less, because why did you click the partial refund button in the first place? But a partial refund is any amount less than the original transaction amount, right? So you do it just the same way you do a refund. Instead of hitting the refund button from the transaction record, you hit the partial refund button. So payment request. You learned earlier during the security section of this training that our payment request feature provides an additional layer of protection for your customers. So this also adds convenience because it reduces the chances of input error on the part of your team, right? It allows your customers to make payments without having to take time to chat or call or email you. And to do it, you've already seen it done once before, so I'm gonna go through it kind of quickly, but popping back over to an opportunity, Acme is getting a lot of action from me. You click the send payment request button, and you have a couple of options here. If you click this lookup field, it's gonna look up the contacts, it's gonna look up the contacts associated with this record. But if there's a new person that just started working there and you haven't created a contact for them yet, but you really need to get this payment request out there, you could also use this field here. As Desmond pointed out though, if you use that field there, they are not gonna have their address info automatically populated. So it's usually recommended that you use the lookup field. It's also usually recommended that if the contact wasn't in there, that you create that contact first and then you go through this process. So Mike Spenny, $150. Hey, I can't type, I promise I can type. Here's the bill for all those tacos. Little note, and you click send request. And I believe Desmond showed you exactly what that looks like, right? They get an email. It's got some merge fields in there if you wanted to reference a couple of other things on their record. And then it's got that link, that payment request link. And that is dropping them into a Salesforce site that's a customer-facing site that's hosted by your org. So all of the same security that your org is relying upon is at play with that site. So anytime you need to track down this is actually a later part or later section of this training, but I'll show you right now too. Anytime you need to track down a payment request that you've already sent, what you would do is, if you're looking at a Chargent order, what Chargent order was that related to? Okay, I'm gonna kind of go backwards, but I'm gonna say that I popped into a Chargent order, right? Chargent order is gonna have a related list called payment requests, because payment requests are initiated from Chargent orders that you can send them from Chargent Anywhere, but it's always still gonna be related to a Chargent order. So I could click this payment request here, and I can click this link, and if it's not expired, it should show me. There you go. So that's what the page looks like. And this is very little customization. I just kind of plopped a generic logo up there. But you guys have seen this in action before. Payment or field validation, just like the rest of our fields. And if Mike needed to make some changes to his billing info, the address and stuff, he'd click this to do that. And click charge. And any of the gateway restrictions that you guys have set up are going to apply to payment requests as well. So if you don't take American Express, Mike's American Express card will not work. So these are the instructions. You can use these for later. Again, this is a reference document for you. So let's do some troubleshooting. Decline payments, right? That's going to be the most common thing that you'll have to troubleshoot if you're working with Chargent and you're the person in charge of, troubleshooting. Sorry. It's tough work. So troubleshooting a failed payment in Chargent begins with learning why it failed. The most common reasons are the stuff that you have already guessed. Invalid card number, incomplete AVS, which is your billing address, invalid CVC, and our app is designed to reliably convey the reason for this decline payment, and upon the initial submission of the payment, you're going to get a pop-up message that'll say declined. Most of the time the pop-up message has an error reason in it, but those are called toast messages and they don't hang out. They appear, then they disappear. So if you want to troubleshoot this and you didn't catch what it was in the toast message, you can pop into the transaction record and you can look at the relevant fields for troubleshooting, which look like this. If you are looking at an order and you want to go into a failed transaction, we're going to pretend this one's failed. Those two fields I pointed out before are response status and response message. So if this says declined, this will usually indicate, invalid CVV or something was missing. So troubleshooting, your first steps are to pop into that transaction and take a look at response status and response message. If that doesn't tell the story, you've got more info down here. And if everything is still real weird and squirrely, that response code might be the first thing I would look up. I would pop over to Chargent support and type in that response code directly into our search field, and you'll probably find it there. We have a pretty good knowledge base if you haven't used it yet. So another troubleshooting exercise, where is my payment request? Well, you forced me to show this already, but I'll show it again. I like your curiosity. So again, if you sent a payment request to a customer and they said they haven't received it and they've checked their spam folder and it's not in there, do I have payment requests against this one? The way that you can track down that payment request is go into the order and click on the payment request in the related list. And you can get the link here yourself. If you want to copy that link and email it to them, you can do that. I do recommend, though, that if the reason that they didn't get it is because you don't have the right email address and file for them, update that contact first, right? But you can copy it. I always recommend testing it yourself first before you copying it. So if you click this and you get something about it being expired, that means that one doesn't work anymore. You need to generate a new payment request. So that's your sort of your troubleshooting steps, right? So if they're looking for their payment request and you've confirmed that it's not in their spam folder, and you've confirmed that their email address is good, then pop into the order, go to the payment request in the related list, check that link to make sure it works, and then send that link to them if it works. If it doesn't work, generate a new one, and you're good to go. So some best practices. The payment industry is closely regulated, right? This impacts the security of your customer and your customers and your company. So as such, it's important that you always operate in a way that is considerate of that security. Here are some best practices to remember. So one, when a customer cannot find their payment request email and you need to create a new one, do so from the original Chargent order. That way you can prevent unused records from littering your org. And also, typically a Chargent order was put together for a reason, and if that payment request was sent, it's supposed to be related to that order. So don't just go creating a new one, pop into that, that specific order and do it. Never enter credit card and bank account numbers into fields other than those explicitly used for that data. Because tokenization works, but it only works on those specific fields. So if you're paying for Chargent and you're using that tokenization and everything's great, but then you enter those credit card numbers some other place, then you're kind of defeating the purpose. So credit card numbers, they live in very specific fields, use those fields. If your customer has a recurring Chargent order, remember how we talked about an order will have multiple transactions, and if it's a recurring order, those transactions will hit that same order over and over again. And then they need to make a one-time payment for something that isn't related to that recurring schedule. I recommend setting up a new order. Create a new order, probably go into Chargent Anywhere on whatever object is configured on, and do a one-time order there. You can technically submit another transaction against that recurring order, but if there's an amount due that's being factored in, you just kind of messed up that amount due. If you submitted it against that same order and then you forgot to change the amount back to what the recurring amount was supposed to be, their next recurring date is going to charge whatever that amount is that you left in that field. So kind of save yourself some headache and just, if that one-time payment has nothing to do with that recurring order, just create a new order. That make sense? Well, thank you very much for hanging out with me. I'm very excited for you guys to be all certified power users and admins. That's going to look pretty good to your company and on your wall. Thank you. Oh, it's
Hey, thank you for watching our video. And while you're here, please subscribe to our channel. Click that notification bell for immediate updates. And if you'd like to talk payments, please get in touch. We're always here to help.